computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 7 of Sci-Fi Snacks in this season 1 focus on women in science fiction. I am so excited to talk about this week's story. It comes from an author who I have read her short fiction before, and I've not read her longer fiction, but it is on my TBR. And I swear I'm going to get to it because everything she writes is amazing looking. I read the synopsis and I'm like, yes, that is exactly the type of stuff that I want to read. This week, we are talking about With Her Serpent Locks from Uncanny, a magazine of science fiction and fantasy by Mary Robinette Kowal. This one you can find online, so I've got it linked in the show notes below. I am also linking next week's story in each of these podcast episodes. So if you haven't taken a look at the show notes, you get a little sneak peek of what we're talking about the next week, and you can read the story ahead of time if you want, if homework is your thing. I can't judge because I am very type A. I am a homework girly. I loved it all through school. So if you're like me and looking to give yourself more homework, even though you're an adult who's been out of school for years, I got you. All right. So this week's story is a fun one, and the snack I paired with it, I knew immediately. Sometimes you just have that flash of brilliance. This one comes from the fact that my kids beg for this candy every time we're in the checkout line and they see all of those bags of Haribo gummies. And their favorite are the twin snakes. Now, I've never had them. So I was like, okay, this time I'm going to buy a bag for me and I'm going to hide it because if I don't hide it, then it will be gone inhaled in 2 seconds. So I was real sneaky about it and I bought these while the kids weren't around so that they didn't even know I had them. I hid them until it was time for me to read this story. So we'll talk a little bit more about the snack at the end and how I think it tied in. This one's a fun one, so stick around for that. This story is a relatively short one, which is fun. We're talking 1,700 words, and I'm going to give a warning here. My pronunciation of Greek names is probably terrible. Now, I have spent a good time on YouTube prior to this episode and writing things out phonetically, but it looks like there's also 2 different camps in how you should pronounce things. So I apologize to the people who I will inevitably upset with how I pronounce these Greek mythology character names. I picked the one that was easiest for me to say after practicing, and we're going to go with that. So, short synopsis of this story. We are on an alien planet, and we meet our main character, Yurili, who has just received a message from her cousin. We don't know who her cousin is yet, but he wants to come and, quote, bring what's left of her sister to bury on this planet where Yurili is. And we get that this is a contentious relationship. There's actually a line right in the beginning that we'll go into later that just kind of, I was like, oh, okay, it's this kind of story. And so throughout this, the cousin eventually ends up coming, and we realize that the cousin is Zeus. And Zeus has the head of Medusa with him and wants to see if Yurili wants to bury Medusa's head in her garden and have her sister close by. And you can tell it really doesn't like Zeus. Zeus doesn't seem to think that anybody wouldn't like him. we go through this whole story, and then this is your last chance before spoilers to check it out yourself. But spoiler, in the end, Euryale ends up turning Zeus to stone. And how can this be? That's doesn't happen to gods and things like that, right? Well, there's a million little loopholes that were set up throughout the story where he drinks the water of a foreign planet. Remember, this is sci-fi. This is not fantasy. And so he drinks the water of that planet. He eats the food of that planet. And there were another couple of little things. And he is not a god on that planet. So when she unleashes her serpent locks at the end, Zeus is shocked and he is turned to stone. And it's the best kind of retribution. So that's the story in a nutshell. It's only 1,700 words. There isn't a lot of extraneous stuff here, but it was really cool. And to talk about the things that I loved, I wanted to first bring up a comment that was made in a writing group chat that I'm a part of. And I'm going to quote it here so that I don't say it wrong, because it was just this mind-blowing reframe for me of when you're looking at different works and what is being bought and what is out there in the magazines and things like that. Whenever people are like, oh, I want to have my writing sold to magazines, it's like the first question is, which ones? What do you read? And a lot of times the answer is, well, none of them. I want to sell. So it's this mindset of, I don't know what is selling, but I want to sell. So you've got to reframe that. So one of the big pushes behind me doing this podcast was I wanted to read more widely. I wanted to read more than the handful of magazines that I already read. And the comment that was made is that when you're getting a lot of rejections that are, there's nothing wrong with this story, but we're not going to buy it, is that it's true, there may not be anything wrong with it, but there may not be enough right with it. And you've got to think that the stories that get picked up out of the slush, the stories that find their way through traditional publishing or magazine short fiction publishing are the ones that really jump out. They're the ones that are doing all of the things right. They lean into all of the things that they are doing really well. I thought that was such a good idea of looking at my own work and being like, okay, what am I doing right? The pieces that have sold, what was it that I had to really push and lean into that made this extra, as opposed to just not doing anything wrong, having this safe kind of, it's a good story, but it's not pushing any boundaries. It's not leaping out off the page at someone and being like, oh, I'm going to remember this story. So I thought that was really cool, and transitions into what I love about this story is that what leapt off the page for me was, this is an amazing example of science fantasy. Now, I don't read a lot in the kind of mashed up genre edges of science fiction and fantasy. Usually I'm reading either strictly sci-fi or strictly fantasy, and they feel very separate in my brain, which is silly because I also grew up on reading Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern. Now, it starts out very much so in a solidly fantasy type world with dragons and dragon riders and all of that kind of stuff. But as you continue to read the series, it gets some serious sci-fi influences. And that was something that I really, really loved. And so it's kind of funny that I don't consider reading science fantasy all the time. And this story did such a good job of taking these fantasy elements. So taking the mythology, the Greek mythology that's so well established. Now, I am not an expert in Greek mythology. I think that is something that a lot of people are really, really into, and all they have to do is see a name. Like, they would see the main character's name, Euryale, and they would know all of this background on her and who she's related to. So when they're like, oh, it's her cousin on the phone, I'm sure there are fantasy readers who are so into the mythology who are like, immediately knew it was Zeus. Now, I did not. Now, what's amazing is this story works even if you don't have that background. It drips out these little Easter eggs that are really fun. And one of these first sentences in the first paragraph here that really stuck out to me, where I was like, oh, okay, this is this kind of story. Before I realized that we were getting into mythology and these characters that are so well established, was her cousin. So she's talking about her cousin, And the way she describes him is the asshole favorite grandson who got away with rape and murder and incest and never had to pay any consequences. I literally stopped and was like, what? What is this story? And I was like, all right, we're going to keep going. But that's a lot to end your first paragraph. That's an example of leaning into doing things more right, like pushing those boundaries. That is not a sentence I would feel comfortable writing down and then being like, yeah, I'm really confident in that sentence. It's an amazing sentence. And I think that's the kind of thing that's going to wave all the flags where you're going to be like, oh, this is a story that isn't afraid to go there, that isn't afraid to tell it like it is and push those boundaries and really just give us a super, super clear point of view. Like, we immediately know that this is a terrible person that she's going to have to deal with, and she knows it, and she's got feelings about it. I think that was such a strong way to start this story, especially for somebody who doesn't know the mythology. And something too that I think people get when we think of mythology, especially Greek mythology, where we've got these families and they're doing all these things, like it feels sanitized in a way where you're like, yeah, Zeus was the king of the gods and he does all of this philandering. And that's another thing. We cap the language. He's a philanderer. He is a cheater and things like that. Whereas in this story, it's nope. He's a rapist. He's a murderer. He does all of these terrible, terrible things. And they say it very plainly. And I think that's something that gets lost in mythology. I think it's the same way with like Shakespeare. When people talk about Shakespeare plays and they've elevated it to this level of the classics. And because it's classic, it must be, I don't know, sanitized, when really Shakespeare was like the pop culture of the day and it's all like sword fights and dick jokes. So I think we run into a lot of the same things there. So I think that the story, in starting the way that it did with this really, really strong point of view, was like, hey, we're not talking about the classics here. Like, we're digging into the character of these characters. I keep wanting to say archetypes because we build archetypes off of these classic characters, and they're not, because these are actual characters in this story. But I think that's something that was done so well, is that we're getting the clear perspective of who these characters are and not coming in with the baggage of, oh, okay, I know who these people are. No, we're going to be told who these people are through this really clear point of view, through these really frank sentences, before we ever know that this is Zeus that we're talking about. If you're me and you don't know that Euryale is the cousin of Zeus, which, you know, I think that it would be really interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you are somebody who knows Greek mythology like the back of your hand, and you go into this and you're like, oh, okay, I know who this is right away. I would be so interested to hear your thoughts on what this story was like for you, because I came into it relatively blind. Now, my thought at the very beginning was with her serpent locks and the title, I was like, oh, this is a Medusa story. I don't think I realized, like, looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, there was more than there were the Gorgons and things like that. But I didn't really know that going in. So I thought that this would be a Medusa story. And then I saw our main character's name and I was like, oh, okay, not Medusa. And so I came into it with this really clean slate, and I thought that the author did an amazing job at laying these Easter eggs and these little pieces along the way. Another thing that I really, really loved was the really lush, natural nature world building and scene setting into this. Now, the reason I feel really, really confident about this being science fantasy, other than the characters, is also this connection to nature and the natural world that I feel like is stronger in the fantasy genre. Not that there aren't science fiction novels that lean into nature, but in general, my categorizing brain says science fiction is either you're in space or it's more like sci-fi, climate fiction, dystopian, where like nature's being destroyed and degraded and things like that. So that feels more science fiction to me in the classic sense. And then fantasies tend to have these lush, beautiful worlds. We're always in gardens. We've got flowers. There's always this imagery, and it's just that feel. And I don't know if that's just based off of, what I've read, but I feel like that connection to the natural world happens in fantasy a lot more than science fiction. And so I thought that this was a really beautiful way to blend the genres. So there's this really great layering of all of this imagery and these nature references in this story. And I thought that was really cool and really made for a beautiful story in such a short space. So I really love that. Now, the things that I learned from reading this story go hand in hand with the things that I loved about it. And I think that happens a lot where I read something that is unlike anything that I would personally write. And it always stretches me and excites me. And the things that are so unlike my own writing style are the things that I love the most. And that's one of the gifts of reading widely. And so in this one, what I really learned is that my knowledge of Greek mythology is pretty basic. I mean, I knew that beforehand. But here I saw that there was a really cool way to take these references and make it something that somebody who didn't have an understanding of could still really appreciate. And I think that's tough because if you know something and you know it really well, it can be difficult to write it in a way that doesn't assume your audience already knows something. There's a logical fallacy that's called the everybody knows fallacy or the common knowledge fallacy. And it's just that when you know something and it feels like common knowledge to you, you just assume that everybody knows. Now, for me personally, I know what this is for me. For me, it's Shakespeare. And I run into this a lot because I love to infuse Shakespearean characters or archetypes or plot lines or structures into the things that I'm writing. And that's not something that everybody catches or picks up on. And sometimes that's okay. So the last novel that I wrote that I'm currently querying has a structure that I essentially borrowed from Shakespeare. And there's this lovely section in it. It's actually my favorite part of the whole thing that I borrow straight from The Winter's Tale, which, again, not a very popular Shakespeare play, but it's my favorite. And I think, well, everybody knows this. Everybody knows the romantic Shakespeare style with the pastoral sequence that has nothing to do with anything else, but it gives the characters a break and you get to go see this lovely nature section and everybody's in love and it's great. And then you leave that and you're back to the reality of awfulness. So to me, common knowledge. Anybody else who's read this book, they don't pick up on it. And that's okay because you don't need to know that I stole structure from Shakespeare to appreciate what that structure does. Now, if you're getting into things where you're expecting them to pick up on the Easter egg and they have to know what's going to happen, that's a problem. So I also took from The Merchant of Venice, and there's a subplot where a woman is getting married and her suitors have to choose a box. And there's only one of those boxes that has her portrait in there. And if they choose the correct one, they get to marry her. Now, they each have a little poem. It's like a riddle. And essentially, it's this big misdirection. There's the beautiful gold box, there's the silver box, and then there's the lead box. And the lead box is the one with her portrait in it. But all of the men who are there with not the right intentions are picking the gold box and the silver box because they think so highly of themselves. And there's this whole thing. It's really intricate. And if you know, you know. But if you don't know, you don't know. So when I pulled a version of that triple choice with the riddles and things like that into my novel, I knew that if people knew that from the play, they get a little peek into, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. We're setting up this choice where it's meant to foil the bad guys. And you get a view of that, but I also had to make sure that all the other clues were there. So the people who had no idea about Shakespeare, who had either never read Shakespeare or read it once in high school and was like, this is terrible, I hate it, that they would also understand the story. They may get it a page later, but they're going to still have a great experience reading that. And I think that this short story reminded me of that, being in the out group, that you need to have those pieces. And so somebody who knows all about Greek mythology is going to know in that first paragraph who we're talking to, who this cousin is. I didn't know until he showed up on the planet and she said the word Zeus. Oh no, Zeus said the word Zeus. He goes, "It's me, Zeus." Because of course he does. So I had a cool experience, even though I was in the out group who didn't know ahead of time that this cousin is Zeus. So I think that's something that I'm going to try and be cognizant of in my own writing, is knowing that you're writing for the in-group and the out-group, and they'll have different experiences, and that's okay. So that brings it all around to our snack. And how do I think that twin snakes worked with the story with her serpent locks? I think they were amazing. And here's the thing. I had never had these before, and I kept eating them, and I was like, oh, these are good, but like they taste weirdly different and not what I expected from a Haribo gummy. And then I realized at the end, I look at the package and it says 1 snake sweet, 1 snake sour. And I was like, what? I've been eating these for 15 minutes and I didn't realize that the different flavors that I was getting from ones that were even the same color were because one was sweet and one was sour. There's no like sour powder dust on them the way that like the sour gummy worms do. And I was wondering, I was like, why are we twin snakes? Like, why are they not just single snakes? And I was thinking, oh, it's just because gummy worms already have that market. Like a single snake is going to look too close to a gummy worm and there are issues and blah, blah, blah. So we just put 2 snakes together because, I don't know, reasons, capitalism, selling more gummies. And then I realized they're 2 different flavor profiles. So you get the sweet and you get the sour all at once in the one twin snake. And I think that just works because it was this unexpected twist ending for me with these snakes. And then it was this unexpected twist ending with the story as well, where Zeus is not really a god and he gets his base expectations are wrong. My base expectations of these gummy snakes were that they were just like gummy bears because that's what they looked like. And I was like, okay, they're a weird shape, but they're just like gummy bears. And they were not. And I didn't realize it until I was already in it. I was at the end and I looked at the package and I was like, oh, maybe I should have read the instructions. Maybe Zeus should have done a little research on the fact that when he went to a different planet, he was no longer a god there. And the rules surrounding his protections from turning to stone were invalidated. Read the fine print. But of course, he's not going to do that. So I thought that this was a really great story with a fun snack and it all tied together. And I just had a great time. I hope you had a great time listening, and make sure you reach out on social media. You can find me at lizjbradley.bsky.social. That's over on Blue Sky. I'm also on Threads at lizjbradley. Let me know, what did you think of this story? What did you think of this snack? What do you think we should read in the future? Thanks so much for listening and have a great week. Bye.